Good afternoon. I'm Shelley Jones, Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement at Missouri State University. The Alumni Association is the organization through which Missouri State students continue their connection with MSU when they leave the university. The Alumni Association is a non-dues paying organization, so all of our alumni are considered members. So what are the BearTalks webinars? If you are new to our series, BearTalks webinars are monthly professional development sessions now offered in a virtual format. So how today's webinar will work, we can't see or hear you. Please use the Q&A feature to type in your questions. This session is being recorded and all registrants will receive a follow-up email late this week with additional resources, contact information for our panelists, a brief survey, and the recorded link. Unfortunately, due to time limitations, we probably will not get through all of the questions. So feel free to reach out to the panelists and ask those questions to them, and they have graciously agreed to provide their contact information. So today's topic, leading is a gradual, continuous process, and good leaders never stop learning. This month's panelists will share their stories and offer tips and suggestions so that you can develop your own leader within. Joining us today are three MSU Bear leaders, Brian Fogel and Joe Spurrier from right here in Springfield, Missouri, and Christina Gardner, who is joining us from Chicago. So how we would like to format our session today is to take some time to visit with each of our panelists individually before we bring them all back together for the last 15 or so minutes for general Q&A. So let's go ahead and start with Christina. Hi, Christina, welcome.
Hi, Shelley.
Great. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Christina. She is a dual alum of MSU. She has a bachelor's in broadcast journalism. She received that in 2017. She received her master's in student affairs in higher education in 2019. While at MSU, she utilized her leadership skills like a lot. She was president of the Association of Black Collegians. She was the public relations co-chair of the homecoming committee. She was an actor in the Giving Voice Theater for Social Change and assistant editor-in-chief of the Black Bear, a Black student-run and Black faculty-advised newsletter. And she currently serves as the founder and lead principal of Sojourner DEI Strategies, a firm that supports organizations in furthering their commitments to inclusion, equity, and social justice. Well, that is a mouthful, Christina. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow. So just reading over some of the activities that you were involved in while you were also juggling classes and masters and bachelors, that must have really required you to juggle a lot. How did you balance all of it?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, Shelley. It definitely was a challenge. I will definitely readily admit that. I think that, being able to have a supportive network of folks that I was leading those organizations with, many of whom were my friends and, close associates, we were able to lean on each other when times got, especially difficult, very busy, which is, something that I think is really essential to leadership, is being able to lean on folks surrounding you, but also, realizing kind of probably later that I should have, the importance of, taking care of yourself amid all your other responsibilities is something that I found to be important as well, because like you said, it can become difficult to balance and sometimes become overbearing. So being able to figure out those best practices as to how to balance everything is super important. But so many of those experiences were really essential into helping me learn and grow as a leader today.
Great. Now, what's your number one self-care tip?
For me, I would say it's having a good sleep routine, like a good wind down routine, ensuring that you try to stick to that as best as possible. So setting a bedtime for yourself, like your parents did when you were a kid, I think has really been very beneficial for me, for sure.
Okay, that's great. So was Missouri State where you really began to hone your leadership skills? Tell us about that.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I was pretty involved in high school as well, but naturally that's a very different environment. The structure of that, you're not as responsible for yourself and the organizations that you're running as, the other folks, the adults are. So, moving into, young adulthood and being, kind of boistered into these leadership roles really based upon like interest and involvement, really allowed for opportunity to learn as I, learn as you go. So naturally, as I was able to be advised and kind of look up to some folks that were in leadership roles that came before me to learn from the things that they did really well, to think about some things that I wanted to do differently once I assumed those different positions. But it definitely taught me so many invaluable skills. I think the best of which, the most important of which was collaboration, was, realizing that leadership oftentimes involves a lot of listening. It's not necessarily always about delegating, surely that is a part of it, but being able to be receptive to listen to one another, to be able to take an idea that maybe comes from someone who's maybe not even on an executive board, for example, within an organization, and mold that and help that person to be able to realize that idea. I definitely learned those skill sets while I was at college at Missouri State. And it really, another just, interpersonal skill sets helped me to really be able to work on some of those soft skills, public speaking, facilitation, leading, meetings, things of that nature, some other forms of coaching that I didn't necessarily realize I was learning those skills as I was, assuming those roles. But ultimately, like I look back on that time and think like, wow, I think I really was able to start honing that skill, when I was 20 years old and, was president of ABC or, what have you. And it's really, I look back on that time very fondly as I think about, how I'm continuing to grow and mold myself as a leader for sure.
Awesome. So can you share more about the first leadership role you had and some of the biggest lessons that you took away from that experience? And you may have just sort of touched on that just now, but is there anything else maybe you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. I think back mostly on that Association of Black Collegians role. And I think that being receptive, again, I think I want to kind of reiterate that as just being receptive to the ideas of those around you. Actually, during my time as president of ABC, our organization won a Star Award for Most Improved Organization. And, that was, definitely a collaborative effort. We increased membership, we increased, our fundraising goals, things of that nature. And, really being able to tap into folks' skill sets is something that I think I learned as well, as being able to recognize that, I have this, list of skill sets, but, they aren't all encompassing, right? That there are people that may lean better when it comes to certain elements of, say, galvanizing folks to become members, or might have a different eye or awareness for a financial sense and things like that. So being able to really lean into folks' talents to be able to help them cultivate those talents is something that I learned in that role as well. And that was, again, with that being my first role, I think that there are a lot of things that I look back on that I probably could have done differently, that I could have done better. That, I didn't always, that collaboration piece was a learning process. There were definitely times when I wanted to be like, this is what we're doing. This is what makes sense. This is what people, our predecessors did, so we're going to do it this way. Or, sometimes the other coin of that, of like our predecessors did this and it wasn't working, so we're going to change it, and not necessarily always, thinking about that bigger picture, thinking about all those different nuances. And later, in hindsight, I look back on those things with the new skills that I've learned of how I could have done those things differently. But the mistakes that I made and the achievements that I made in that role were incredibly invaluable for sure.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like evaluating strengths and weaknesses of not only yourself, but also the others on your team is really a skill set that a good leader has, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I have had the opportunity to take StrengthsFinder a variety of times throughout my college career and adult career. And something that always comes up for me is Maximizer. It's always been in my top 5. And I think that that's a really, it speaks very truly to how I think about my interactions with other people in a work setting, in a leadership setting, which is, being able to have that kind of keen awareness of areas in which people really excel, really shine, really do well. And not to say that you neglect areas of growth for other people, but to really lean on people's talents and to help them, to be able to cultivate those to a further extent. I think that, obviously it's important to, foster growth in areas for improvement, but I think that people feel much more enriched, much more valued when they can utilize things that they're very comfortable in, very talented in, things that they have a passion for and want to grow in. I think that that's where you kind of see the best of the people that you're working with.
Great. So how did MSU and the leadership experiences that you had here help prepare you for what you're doing now in your profession?
Sure. So as it said in my bio, I work primarily in diversity, equity, and inclusion, social justice oriented work. And before I had the language that I have now to theorize about those different topics, to be able to educate others surrounding those different topics, it was definitely something that I always had an interest in and felt, deeply passionate about, even before I had the rhetoric for it. So, part of my reasoning for joining the Association of the Black Collegians was to, advance the notoriety, the plight, the community sense of for Black students at Missouri State University, and in joining the homecoming committee after my time as president of ABC. Part of my goal in doing that was to ensure that when it comes to homecoming and these other traditions that are so integral to being a Bear, to being a part of the university, to make sure that students of color and students of other marginalized identities were feeling a part of those large scale traditions, and so that we could ensure that we were being just as deeply involved in those as some of our non-POC counterparts. And so, before I, was able to articulate that with my, my peers who are, also a part of that committee, I was still finding different ways to advocate in that space. And honestly, that was somewhat challenging, and depending on what space that I was in. And I think that one of the resources that that you'll be sharing on our behalf later kind of talks about that as being able to be the dissenting opinion in a room, and being able to be that dissenting opinion and be steadfast in your feelings, your convictions when something doesn't sit right, being able to advocate for that, and really hoping to be able to foster change amongst the folks that you're sitting at that table with. And I think that, being kind of bold enough to enter into those spaces and vocalize my convictions surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion in that way definitely prepared me to be able to enter into different spaces that I'm able to enter into now. Sure.
All right. So I know one of the topics that you wanted to talk about was imposter syndrome. And we also had a question that was pre-submitted as well about, can you share more about imposter syndrome, offer tips on how leaders can help move past this?
Sure. So that's definitely something that I've experienced, that I know a lot of other folks experience. And I kind of like to think of it in the framework. Shonda Rhimes, who we all may know and love from Grey's Anatomy and behind, Bridgerton and all these other shows. had this concept of being the first only different, and the challenges of being either the first, either woman or Black person, Black woman, or in a space, or being different from your colleagues, and leaning into those differences and recognizing the challenges that can come with that, but also the opportunity that comes with that. So when it comes to imposter syndrome, I think the thing that I always come back to that's been the most helpful for me is, recognizing that if I've been, invited into a room, if I've been hired into a room, if I've been, network myself into a room, then I have the right and the honor of being there, and I should be taking up whatever space I am able to take up. That any space that I'm in is for me. I'm there for a reason, and that my opinion, my thoughts, my presence is valued by those among me. And I think that also recognizing that if you are, you do happen to be of a different, either even educational background, age, what have you, from the other folks in the room, being able to recognize that offers you a unique perspective, that, actually I sat on a panel a couple of weeks ago where I definitely experienced a sense of imposter syndrome. And that panel was with, other folks of color, but I think from like a career standpoint and an age standpoint, I felt that the things that they had to say maybe were more valuable than mine. But, having to go back to that point of, being, younger, that offers a different perspective, that someone in the room may be, may, lean well to their lived experiences, and they may be able to relate and empathize with that. So being willing to lean into that uncomfortability, but also realizing that, you have a purpose and a place in that space.
Okay. And no, I think we're getting our little 2-minute warning. So I think we've got time for one more area to talk about before we move on to our next panelist. And I wanted to talk a little bit about career transitions. I know that was an area you really wanted to talk about as well. And how does that play in your leadership development?
Yeah, I think that and just to, share what I mean by career transitions, I think that, what I wanted to do as, that 20-year-old writing for that newsletter, now being, a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, my career path has definitely not been linear. I know for a lot of folks it is, and they have really beautiful, career maps, and it stays very linear for them. I have a number of friends who have had those types of career paths, and sometimes I've found myself sometimes envying that, just knowing from 19 what you wanted to do and being able to do that. But I oftentimes like to tell myself and tell those around me to not be afraid to, apply for positions or go to different events or conferences that might be, related to a career path that's completely unrelated to what you're doing now, or may some way be related adjacently, because I think that what I found now in the way in which we do work, there's so many, transferable skills. There's so many skill sets that someone in, in a different industry might not see the connection of, but, once you've talked to people and done specific research, you can see how there might be these, connections that may be able to transfer into a different career path that may, shift either your career trajectory or your life trajectory from, being able to advance, positionally or, economically. So I always encourage folks to not be afraid and not think that what they're doing right now, there's no way I could do this, when I think that there's a lot of different ways in which, if you, think outside the box, you really might be able to find that you can do this other thing. Yeah.
Oh, that is some great advice. Well, thank you, Christina, for joining us. So we're going to go ahead and bring on our next panelist, but we're coming back. We're going to let you come back and offer some more wisdom to us. So thank you. Well, hi, Brian. Welcome.
Thanks, Shelley. Good to be here. Honored to be asked. Thanks.
Well, thank you. So let me tell you a little bit about Brian. If you live in Springfield, Missouri, you are bound to recognize the servant leader. From his 30 years in banking, involvement in numerous civic and nonprofit groups, to his dapper bow ties, and his role as president of the Community Foundation of the Ozarks, this lifelong leader is hard to miss. He's definitely one you want to have as a friend. Brian attended Missouri State from 1974 to 1976, and then went on to the University of Mississippi, to earn a bachelor's and master's in banking and finance. He also received an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Drury University. He's received many accolades for his leadership and community service, including the Springfielding Award, the Chamber's most coveted and highest honor. This award is given annually to an individual who exemplifies outstanding community service, excellence in his or her field, and dedication to improving the quality of life for Springfield and its citizens. So again, thank you, Brian, for making time to join us today.
Thanks so much, Shelley. My pleasure.
Okay, so we have a slew of questions for you. I'm sure we won't get through them all, but let's start off with, you have a motto in your life that you have shared. Would you want to say what that motto is and kind of tell the audience a little bit more about where does it come from and what does it mean to you?
Sure. I've always said I'm often wrong, seldom in doubt, and that probably comes mostly from my family. Of no matter what the topic, I feel like I can contribute to that conversation. And sometimes it's right, sometimes it might be close, but it never makes me hesitate to share about something that I think I might know something about. So that's where that comes from. Tongue in cheek a lot of the times, for sure.
There you go. I love it. So how would you describe your leadership style? And I mean, you've been a leader for a long time. Has your style evolved over the years? And if so, how?
Yeah, I would, that made me reflect on that when you sent that question. And I would like to say I'm participatory. I believe that we can all come together and listen, and we all have ideas to share from different vantage points. And I think that helps strengthen the decision and the organization. I also think I try to be very deliberate, that we have goals to achieve, missions to accomplish, and that we need to stay focused on those very much. And getting back to Christina's comments of the imposter syndrome, certainly I've experienced that a lot. And just even as you're reading my introduction makes me think, who are you talking about? So I've learned a lot. I think my leadership has changed, leadership style has changed. And I would say the other thing, I think one of the most important things, I'm probably getting ahead, but is curiosity. And as anybody who knows me will always, I ask lots of questions. And that's because I want to know. And I think the more you know and the more questions you ask, the better leader you are.
That's great. So what role do you feel that empathy, humility, and vulnerability play in a good leader?
I think when I first started in my first leadership position, and that was many years ago, and I was actually over a bank, and it was like, I've learned all this thing, I've read about it, and I started this Employee of the Month program and was going to do all this open book management. And I remember Betty, who was a teller, who had been a teller for about 35 years, came to me after about 6 months and said, I want to retire. And I was like, Betty, why, you're our best teller. You've got all this experience. She goes, I don't like all this new stuff. I just want to count money and talk to my customers. And that hit me hard. I was like, oh, you just aren't enlightened. I didn't say that, but I thought that. And what I realized, Shelley, is that we're all different and we all have different motivations. And the key to leadership, I think, is learning what those motivations are individually. And that requires empathy. And that requires asking questions, understand how that person reacts versus another. You've got to be flexible, and certainly empathy serves one well. And humility, that was a lesson in humility, is maybe I don't know everything. The more I've been in leadership roles, the more I realize the less I know.
Wow. Okay. So can you describe the best and worst leaders that you have known or worked for and why? And then how has this helped you develop personally as a leader?
So, and I think truly you can learn as much from a bad leader or manager as you can from a good one. And again, thinking in particular, the worst boss I had, micromanaged, focused on the wrong things. And I learned from that to say, I'm never going to do that because I know how it feels to be treated that way. The best manager I ever had, it was a brand new leader to our bank. And he came in, he sat in on every meeting we had, from tellers to maintenance to everything. And he sat in the corner and he took notes and he didn't say a word for 4 or 5 months. And I thought, even to the point where people are saying, who is this? What's he do? Why are we paying him to go to meetings and not say anything? And what I realized is he was learning all about our organization. And once he did that, then he could start making changes and here's what I observed, here's what you said. And again, I learned a lot from that. So coming in and making a bunch of changes just to prove yourself is a bad strategy. It's first going in, learning about the organization, learning what they do well and what they don't do so well, and then earning that trust to start making those changes. So someone I still to this day admire greatly, a great leader, and certainly, and we were a high performing bank because of that, and again, his leadership.
That's some great advice. So you've also talked to me about the Fogel wave theory. Now, I don't have a clue what that is, but I bet you're going to tell us.
Sure. So two of my mentors, and one of the things I would say if you're a leader or an aspiring leader, is get mentors who are good leaders and you want to learn from them. And I've had a couple I've been very blessed with, and one was a former city manager, one a former chamber director, and both of them would call me a lot and say, what do you think about this? And I would give my opinion. And I thought, if they're calling me, they're calling 50 people. But they're doing that to both get ideas and to get buy-in up front. And then I was at a Cardinals game one time when I saw this. This is where the Fogel wave theory came from. If you've been to a Major League Baseball game, the wave always starts. And, it may start in the first inning or the second inning, and it'll start in one small group. And then it'll take several innings to get all the way around the stadium. And I was at a Cardinals game many years ago, and I noticed these people would go to one section and they would say, hey, the wave's going to be coming, get ready. Then they would go 2 sections down and say, the wave's going to start. And literally they gave everybody notice to anticipate, to look for it. And we went all the way around the stadium in about 3 tries in 1 inning instead of 7 innings that it normally takes. So often in leadership, we start with a small group and try to blast it out over time versus getting buy-in, going around, letting people know, getting, again, anticipation that this is going to happen. And I think we can all learn a lot from that versus just trying to blast it out with a few people.
What a great analogy. I can see the wave going right now here. So as a leader, why is it important to decide early on what is the ethical and moral line that you'll never cross?
I had a professor, a marketing professor, Dr. Park, still remember him very well. And we, back then, this was working on my MBA, we did a lot of case studies. And I still remember the case, that's been 50 years ago, but it was Harvard After Dark. It was a magazine that had started. And it really came down to a moral, ethical decision. And I remember Dr. Park saying something about what would you do in that situation? Well, being the young idealistic, I remember raising my hand and saying, Dr. Park, I would quit. I would never do that. And he said, smiled at me very patiently, and he said, when you've got children and a mortgage, come back and tell me how you would do that. it's not as easy to be idealistic. And that made me think right then, there are lines I need to have that are finite and that I'll never cross morally, ethically. I was sharing with you, Shelley, somebody I work with that ended up doing prison time, and that I work with, a banker, and I know he would never go from what he was doing to what he was doing and breaking the law in one step. It was little tiny steps along the way. I'll cut the corner here, I'll look the other way here. And before you knew it, he was committing a crime. And that reinforced to me there are these lines that I will never cross. And I think we need to do that early on so we're not tempted to just put a toe over. We just say, nope, I made that promise, that pledge to myself, I'll never do that.
Yep. All right. You've shared in the past that friends and relationships are not made during a crisis. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I bet you've seen some crises on your end where you are.
Yeah, it's and we've done a lot of work here with disaster recovery. We were very involved in the Joplin tornado recovery, and literally spent 5 years on recovery there. And more recently, the pandemic. And when a crisis happens, you are so focused on just getting through that minute. You can't get people together. You can't build those relationships in a crisis. So it's got to be done in advance. And that's one of the things I'll brag about Springfield is we're very collaborative. And there is our leadership group has been meeting for 25 plus years. We meet every month at 7 a.m. in the morning, and we talk about those communities. And through that, relationships are built, trusts are built, friends are made. And when something bad happens, a crisis happens, we don't have to worry about who does what. We know that because we built those relationships very deliberately over that time. And that has served us well as a community.
Okay. Let's talk about with you work-life balance. What does that look like for you?
Well, I'm a really bad example, probably, Shelley. So not one of my strengths. One of the things when we started having children is I realized to get everything done that I want to get done, I need to totally change my day. And so I've been an early riser since then. I get up early. I'm usually here by before 6. And that allows me to do things I want to get done, prior. And then at that time, I could go home and spend time with my children, not have to work so late. I could see them before they went to bed. And that sort of became my habit. And one of the things is it's a pleasure for me to come to work. I love working at Community Foundation of the Ozarks. I love coming to work and the colleagues I have. That makes it a little bit easier too to spend the hours here. But what I try to do on weekends is totally unplug. And at night, I don't take work home. I never have. People get frustrated at me. I turn my phone off on the weekends because I just want to be unplugged and not think about it. Even though I love work, I also need to remind myself there's more to life than just that. And that's what I do on weekends.
Oh, that is some great advice. Well, Brian, I can't believe our time has already come and it's time to move on to our final panelist, Joe. So we'll have Joe join us. Hey, Joe, welcome.
Hello.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about Joe. She received a master's in organizational communication from Missouri State University in 1987. She spent years working for the Disney Company, General Electric, and Nike, and developed a passion for what it takes to create and maintain a world-class organization. She's traveled the world. She's led leadership courses in over 20 countries and 6 continents with one unwavering focus, and that is to drive bottom line results. She's the founder of Berkana and creator of the Performance Gap Indicator. She's an international management consultant and thought leader on business performance. So sounds fabulous. We're looking forward to some big picture stuff with you, Joe.
Well, all right, great. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yes. All right. So let's start us off with, from a global perspective, what are you seeing out there as being the top challenges for leaders?
I would have to say more than ever, the generational differences. Like Brian just discussed, work-life balance is always alive and well. And I would say handling conflict. You know, if we look at those one by one, the generational workforce, it's interesting because I believe the three panelists you have, we've hit three different generations. You know, we've got a baby boomer, Gen X, and millennial. I believe millennial. I don't think Gen Z. I think millennial. And it'd be interesting if people are able to put in the chat what they identify, because you've got the baby boomers that goes up to about 1964, Generation X 1980, millennial about 2000. And what they're motivated by, what they value, how they handle conflict is very, very different with all the different generations. And learning to balance that, if you are a leader in a corporation, can be incredibly challenging. So that's one thing that I see no matter where I'm at. You know, the second one that I talked about is work-life balance, and it's different for the generations as well. You know, I'm kind of a Gen X boomer, depending upon how I look at it. I tend to identify more with Gen X, and I'm right on that cusp. And we're the workaholics. You know, we get in there and we don't really have that balance, but the generations coming up behind us definitely are. And they kind of even demanded it. If not, they have no problem moving elsewhere, a very transient workforce. And then that last one is handling conflict. Whether you have a formal leadership role in a company or just, you know, it could be on a bowling league, it can be PTA, it can be a church committee. If you have more than two individuals, you're going to have communication problems and you're going to have conflict. And knowing how you respond to it and how then to respond to others is just central in learning how to motivate and move a workforce, a team, or a department.
And I think you made a good point. You know, leaders are everywhere. I mean, you don't have to be a CEO of a company in order to be considered a leader. If you have two people, you can be a leader at any age with any group. So what qualities do you think are lacking among today's leaders?
Wow. And before I dive into that, I love that you said, even with two people, you know, you're going to have a leader if you have two people. Think about your friendships. And that leadership role may go back and forth, but you always have one leading. It's the same way in families as well. Qualities that are lacking, I would have to say sense of camaraderie, because competition has just taken on an incredible new life as the generations have gone through the workforce. And sometimes I see it in corporate quite a bit. I do a lot of leadership, do a lot of team building, moving people through transitions of acquisitions and mergers and such. And you can imagine just the instinctual individual competition, but then you've got competition between the leaders as well. My department, your branch, my division, your division. And we tend to lose sight that we're all on the same team. You know, we're there to move the company forward. And I think that universal sense of community and camaraderie has kind of been set on the sidelines. So I hope we can work to bring that back into the back on the court versus in the sidelines. But it's definitely been sidelined for a while.
Sure. And sometimes a leader, you may be in a leadership role, but you aren't always in that leadership role. Sometimes you're a follower. And so you also have to be, you may have a title, but you may be in a follower role. And so you need to be able to transition to, when you're leading, you're leading. When you're following, you need to be a good follower too, to make a strong team. Right?
As well as the different hats that we put on in life, right? You might be a CEO, but when you get home, your husband tends to be more in charge. Or you might be the leader of PTA, but when you go to work, you're the frontline teller and you definitely report to others. So knowing how to take those hats on and off successfully and transition smoothly can be a challenge.
Yeah. So have you noticed any leadership traits specific to the United States?
Oh my gosh. Interesting question. Well, I'm going to start out by saying no matter where I travel, whether it be, India or Russia or Prague or even Canada or Mexico, we're much more similar than we are different, without a doubt. And we all think that we're more different, especially when I'm teaching. We have like 16 different countries represented in one room. Everyone thinks they're an island, right? I'm different. I have a different way. My company's different. So I really think the reminder that we have more similarities than we do differences needs to be held at the top of that stack. But I would say I am noticing differences. And the main one is that in America and in the United States, as soon as we get that promotion, as soon as we get that new job, we're looking for the next step. Before you even get, your head around your job, you're already thinking about strategizing. What's my next move? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to impress? What do I need to do? What skills do I need to go to the next job? And that, of course, is present in other cultures, but not as much. We're all about advancement. Maybe it's that, frontiersman, that revolution, that we have in our DNA of being Americans, but we're always looking for the next step. We're always looking to clear the way, smooth out the path, and keep going forward. When sometimes it might behoove us to take a breath, master where we're at before we think about moving forward.
Yeah, that's some great advice. So what about introverts? What type of leadership development tips might you offer to our introverts out there who might be watching?
Interesting, introverts. And oddly enough, I make my living speaking. I make my living talking and being on stages and training, as I say, but I'm an off the chart introvert. And knowing that, I really relate to this quite well. So if you are an introvert, your self-training, your self-coaching would be to let that be your advantage. Because the main thing to remember between extroverts and introverts is that extroverts talk in order to think. You'll ask them a question, they'll be like, well, let me think about that for a second. What you're really asking me is, now if I stop and think about that, you'll hear them talk in order to think. And introverts think in order to talk. So if you ask a table full of introverts a question, you're going to see them take a breath in, usually scoot back a little bit, and it'll be about 6 to 7 seconds before they respond. Now that might not seem like a lot, but it really is if you time it. So if you're a leader and you know that you have, and you absolutely do, introverts on your team, give them a heads up. If you're leading a meeting, you might say, in a moment, I'm going to be asking the team about this. Giving them just a little bit of heads up to start thinking about their answer. Because more commonly than not, if you ask a team and just throw out, so team, what are you thinking about that? Your extroverts are going to do what? They're going to jump on it. And the loudest idea usually wins. The one that talks the fastest usually wins. When sometimes it is the best idea, sometimes it's not. And so allowing that time to let your introverts give a little bit of heads up will really, first of all, include them, invite them into the conversation, and they'll be ready to share when they're speaking.
Gotcha. Yes. Yes. I think that what we were talking about earlier, like know yourself, but know your team as well. And that's some great info. So I know one of the things you had before was the 3 No's of leadership, the KNOWS of leadership. What are those?
You gave me the perfect entrance for that. I couldn't have asked that to be done better, Shelley. The 3 No's of leadership is know yourself, know your team, and know where you're going. If we look at that, know yourself, your strengths, your challenges, your tendencies, know your team. Now, this may not mean that you're leading a team, but we all are on a team. So know your team. It refers to your employees, your peers, your teammates, and know where you're going. You know, there's a saying that I've never forgotten. If you don't know where you're going, any bus will get you there. So if you don't know, you know, where you're going, somebody else will show you the way and you'll be on their path instead. You know, so I would be thinking about what's a 90-day cycle. You know, things move really fast nowadays. So you might want to have like a 90-day, 1 year, 3 year, and 5 years even pretty iffy. You know, when I started consulting, we would do 10-year vision plans. No one even thinks about that now. The world just changes way too much. And I think I would even throw a bonus no in there. I'll give you a fourth no, and that is to know what you stand for. And Brian even touched on this a little bit earlier. We live a life that what you put up with, what you tolerate. Your life is what you tolerate. And if you don't know what you stand for, you'll blow with the wind. So, you know, you want to know what you stand for, take a look at your life. And what you have present in your life is what you tolerate and what you stand for. It's really simple. It's not rocket science with this. But if you don't spend time knowing, you'll end up following someone else and you blow with the wind and you won't really have a consistent path for that. The four
That's some
no's.
great stuff. That is some great stuff. The KNOWs, not the NOs.
That's right.
The KNOWs. All right, so now we are to our Q&A part. And so let's go ahead and bring our panelists back. And we're also going to bring my colleague on as well, Candace Wolf. Candace is going to be joining us. So my eyes aren't darting all over trying to find the questions. So she's going to actually be the one sharing some of the questions that were pre-submitted as well as some that you all have been sending in. So I'm going to let Candace, you take it away.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. I really enjoyed all of your interesting takes on leadership and so much. Really quick, we had created a poll just to get to know our audience a little bit better. So I'm going to launch that just to see how long you have been in your leadership role. Maybe you're just looking to become a leader. Maybe you've been in that role for a little bit. And while that's going, feel free to answer, but I'm going to throw something out to you guys because I think you all talked about the challenges of leadership or the hardest piece of leading right now. I want to know what the most rewarding part is for you.
Well, I'll be that extrovert who speaks first, Joe. So
Thank you.
yeah. You know, it is when you accomplish something you set out to do and you did it together, it's fulfilling. And I would just say in this, you know, this time of a pandemic, you know, I couldn't be more proud of Community Foundation of the Ozarks, what we were able to do in a time of helplessness to bring help. And it was all of our staff doing that. And that's just really, really rewarding when you're able to accomplish something to make the world better. And that's why we all come to work every day to make our little corner of the world better. And when you've done something, you know, that's helped others, that's very fulfilling.
I'll jump in now that I've had my 6 seconds. I'm a coach at heart. So I have to say for me, whether it's in a formal leadership, whether it's from the stage or leading a team, it's seeing the light bulbs go on. You know, when someone on your team gets it and when they excel and you just see it, you see it in their eyes, you see it in your face. If you're an educator, if you're a leader, you know, if you're leading a baseball team, you will see when they get it. And that moment is just, it's magnetic. It's fantastic. I think that's what stands out over all the years.
I think mine is somewhat similar to Joe. I would say that one of my, words of love and love languages of the workplace is definitely words of affirmation. So when I have either done a learning and development session or worked with someone and they, articulate to me that they learned a great deal, they felt like what I shared with them helped them to be able to progress or navigate a situation or something like that, that is probably the part of leadership that warms my heart the most, that makes me feel rewarded and feel that what I'm doing is making an impact. So that's what I would have, having it be affirmed by my colleagues.
Those are perfect. All right, I'm going to share the results from our poll just to give everybody a look at who we have. So interesting, we've got almost half of our audience has been in their leadership role for a while, but we also have a number of people who are looking to become a leader. So that is great. Thank you so much for that information. Next question for you all. What's the best advice that you have received and still use about leading others?
I think that
Where I
was
go
during
with-
change. That was during change.
Well, I've got something on a prose. It's kind of a poem on the wall that I read almost every day, and it's called "Pay Attention." And that is something that I tend to be pulled 8 million ways, and see the squirrel and start chasing. So paying attention for me is something that I've always had to remind myself of, and I've got something right there on the wall that reminds me to do that. But I think that's very, very important in every way.
I would say your team or those around you don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I know that just sounds like a cliche statement, but it is so true. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And keeping that in mind reminds you to, before anything, connect.
I would say, particularly in times of change, that growth doesn't typically come from comfortability, that, you have to be willing to lean into the fear of failure, to be able to lean into, uncharted territory, and with the knowingness that the ideas that you may have, the ideas that your team may have, even though they might be well thought out and collaborated in a very mindful sense, that sometimes mistakes can happen. So being able to lean into that fear and uncomfortability is, I think, is very important in times of change.
Yeah, and I think we all kind of feel that sense of change right now in different workplaces and people coming and going from careers. So great advice. We had a question come in that I thought was really good, thinking about leadership within a nonprofit or volunteer aspect. So for those leading nonprofits, how do you get buy-in from volunteers to help with programs, services, whatever it might be, that a nonprofit might provide?
I've consulted with quite a few nonprofits, and it is tough because a lot of them all voluntarily. The staff are volunteers. So I would say tapping into why they're there, their reason, their mission, and how they've connected to what is important for that nonprofit. Maybe it's the end result of that nonprofit, but I would say it doesn't stray very much from leadership when I said you need to first connect. But with the nonprofits, even more so, because they're there for a reason. It usually has something to do, what they care about, what's important to them, or their values. So tapping into that.
I would also say, I think it's so important to set up expectations up front. And, I've seen several nonprofits that actually, here's the volunteer expectations, or even I've seen some sign a contract. We need to value them and understand their giving, but also know that we have a mission, to accomplish. And so we've got to do that together. And I remember I was a lunch buddy for many years in a school. And I remember when I volunteered to do that, they said, and this was in a Title I school, they said, you need to commit to me that you will be here every week, because they have had adults in their life disappoint them, not show up. You can't do that or it'll make it worse. And that was really helpful to me. I did it and I made that commitment. But had they not had that up front, I may have shown up every other week and always made an excuse. Well, I've got a business lunch or whatever. So I think setting an expectation with volunteers is very, very important.
I know our time is running low and I want to give us time for one more question. So what is one piece of advice you wish you would have received, or one piece of advice you want to give our audience about growing in their leadership or becoming a leader?
I would say for me, and received this both articulated and in behavior from who I would say is the best supervisor that I've had to this day, Avanya Garcia Pusateri, who serves as the Chief Diversity Officer for Springfield Public Schools. And she was just always so mindful about putting our personhood first, about recognizing that, we each had different lived experiences that we brought into the working environment with us each day. And she always led with empathy. And I think that that's the piece that I received from her, is being mindful of leading with empathy.
Christina, you must have been tapping into me there, because what I was going to say is remembering that your employees, your volunteers, they don't leave their lives at the door when they come in. They come in with all of it. And to never forget that we don't know what's going on in people's lives. A deadline's a deadline, but that really may not be what is most important to them at that moment for very good reason. So just remembering that they don't leave their lives at the door.
And I would just build on that, Joe, is I remember Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote several books that I'm a big fan of. And one was, he talked about, would you rather be right or would you rather be joyful? And so often we want to be right all the time, no matter what, and forget about that person. And again, in the last 2 years, grace has become a big word in my mind that I always have to remember, because everybody's on edge. This is our first pandemic we've been through. We need a break and we need grace.
Thank you. I feel like I went to leadership church today. Thank you. That was all just really, really great advice. Thank you. All right, Shelley, I'll turn it back over to you.
Church. I love it. Well, thank you, panelists, for joining us this afternoon, and to our audience. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today and are leaving with some great takeaways. I know I am, and hopefully you do as well. If you have suggestions on topics or alumni speakers, please include them on the survey that you'll get later this week in the follow-up email. And then with the upcoming holiday break, our next BearTalks webinar is going to be taking place on Thursday, January 27th from noon to 1 p.m. Central. And our title is Build Momentum and Bounce Forward in 2022. So I think that will be relevant to everybody. So registration for that session will begin in early January. So make sure to watch for your email. Thank you, everyone. Have a great holiday season. We hope to see you back here soon. And what do we always say when we close it out? Go Bears. See you all.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.